He overheard one hushed conversation that shattered every illusion he had about his new family. In that moment, something inside him broke, and something cold began to flicker to life. Daniel had married Emily with an open heart and endless hope. Coming from a humble background, he believed that marrying her meant gaining the loving family he never had. For a while, it seemed true. Her parents, Charles and Vivian, greeted him with polite smiles and courteous words. Her sister, Isabel, and Isabel's wealthy husband, Michael, welcomed him with friendly handshakes. Every Sunday dinner and holiday gathering was a chance for Daniel to finally feel like he belonged. He trusted them, adored them even, for accepting him into their well-to-do, close-knit clan. He trusted them so completely that he overlooked the hairline cracks forming beneath the surface. And that trust made the betrayal cut so much deeper when the facade finally fell. In the early days, Daniel was nothing if not devoted. He and Emily had fallen in love back in college, when the world seemed simple and open. Emily was Daniel's light, a bright, compassionate woman from an upper-middle-class family with a warm smile. Daniel came from almost nothing. His parents had struggled to pay the bills in his childhood, and the idea of a big, happy family was a dream he'd clung to. With Emily, that dream felt within reach. He thought that if he worked hard and loved her right, he could climb the social ladder by her side and earn the respect of her family. At first, Charles and Vivian appeared to give him a chance. They did their best to be civil, if not warm. Daniel remembered the nerve-wracking dinner when Emily first brought him home to meet them. The house was modest, but to Daniel it felt like a palace. Art on the walls, a dining room just for hosting guests, the subtle shine of affluence in every corner. He'd sat at their table, hands slightly trembling beneath it, as he answered questions about his studies and his future plans. He spoke about being the first in his family to attend college, about the part-time jobs that helped cover tuition. He was honest about his humble origins. Charles had nodded, lips pressed thin in a polite smile, while Vivian offered him more roast chicken with a kindness that almost seemed genuine. That night, after Daniel went home, he replayed every detail to see if he'd measured up. They hadn't said anything overtly cruel. Perhaps they truly approved. In bed, Emily curled up to him and whispered, "They like you, I can tell. Just give them time." He wanted to believe her. In that moment, swathed in the darkness of their tiny apartment, Daniel decided he would prove himself worthy of her family's respect. He vowed to climb, step by step, into the life Emily deserved. A life where their different backgrounds wouldn't matter. Yet, even in those early days, subtle warnings glinted like shards of glass in the periphery of his vision. One afternoon, months before the wedding, Charles invited Daniel to lunch at a quiet, upscale restaurant. Daniel thought it was a bonding gesture, just the two of them getting to know each other. Instead, he found himself sitting across from Emily's father, who was stirring his coffee slowly, choosing his words with care. Charles cleared his throat and spoke without meeting Daniel's eyes. "You know, I only want the best for my daughter." Then he slid a folded check across the table. The amount written on it made Daniel's breath catch. It was more money than he had seen in his life. "Consider this a gift to help you find a more suitable path." The implication was clear. Take the money and quietly disappear from Emily's life. Daniel stared at the check, feeling heat rise to his face. His hands trembled, not with temptation but with hurt and anger he barely contained. He pushed the slip of paper back toward the older man. "I love your daughter. I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice soft but firm. Charles's gaze hardened for a split second. Then he pocketed the check, saying nothing more about it. That day, Daniel should have recognized the gesture for what it was, a warning shot from a future betrayer. But when Charles later acted as if it never happened, Daniel allowed himself to believe it had just been a moment of misguided fatherly concern. He convinced himself it was a test of character that he had passed. Other red flags fluttered at the edges of those early years. During wedding planning, Emily's parents insisted on paying for most of the ceremony, since Daniel's own parents could contribute little. It seemed generous, but as decisions were made, Daniel realized he and his family had effectively been sidelined. Vivian chose the catering, the venue, even the guest list, with a perfumed hand of iron. When Daniel's mother timidly suggested adding a traditional song from their culture to the reception, Vivian smiled thinly and answered, "Perhaps another time." In the end, the wedding was beautiful, but it felt like it was Charles and Vivian's show. Daniel swallowed his pride, grateful that they hadn't openly insulted his family's financial standing. He told himself that they just wanted the best for their daughter's big day. After the wedding, Daniel tried even harder to be the ideal husband and son-in-law. He accepted every invitation to family events, arriving on time with a bottle of wine or a homemade dish to contribute, eager to please. He laughed at Charles's dry, biting jokes that sometimes veered a bit too close to remarks about people who don't understand the value of hard work, a comment directed at no one and everyone. He helped Vivian carry dishes to the sink after dinner, despite her protests that guests didn't need to help. He wasn't just a guest, he was family now, he thought, and he wanted to pull his weight. Emily, for her part, was blissfully unaware of much of the tension. She knew her parents could be a bit traditional and stiff, but she saw the best in them and in Daniel. To her, the two worlds she loved would simply blend with time. Daniel loved her all the more for that optimism, even if a quiet part of him felt the strain of walking on eggshells to make it so. Over time, Daniel found a decent job as an accountant at a small firm. It wasn't the high-paying career of his brother-in-law, Michael, who was swiftly climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious company, but it was honest work. When Daniel proudly announced his new job at a family dinner, Charles responded with a subdued, "That's a start," while Michael gave him a congratulatory clap on the back. To Michael's credit, the other son-in-law often tried to include Daniel in conversations, but soon the discussion shifted to Michael's recent promotion, and the family's attention followed. Daniel sat quietly, smiling, reminding himself that this wasn't a competition. Still, a small voice inside whispered that he'd never measure up in their eyes. There were other moments, small, almost dismissible moments, that pricked at Daniel's confidence. Once, after a long day at work, he arrived late to a dinner at the Lester home. Slipping in, he apologized for the delay, explaining that his aging car had given him trouble. Isabel's husband, Michael, quipped with a chuckle, "Should have gotten a German car like mine, more reliable." Isabel laughed and added, "Or just leave earlier next time. We all know traffic can be bad from your side of town." The comment stung. Your side of town. An innocent phrase on the surface, but Daniel heard the undertone. They lived in a modest neighborhood far from the Lester's leafy suburb. He forced a grin and found his seat beside Emily, telling himself he was being too sensitive. Through all this, Daniel remained loyal and hopeful. He loved Emily and didn't want to burden her with every slight or dart thrown his way. Sometimes he mentioned a hurt feeling, like that comment about his car or his job, but Emily would squeeze his hand and say, "I'm sure they don't mean it how it sounded. They just have a weird sense of humor." And Daniel would nod, wanting to believe it, choosing to overlook the growing collection of tiny cuts in his heart. After all, they were family now. And family forgives and forgets, right? But family is also supposed to protect and cherish you. And slowly, Daniel was realizing that wasn't the case here. the truth did not surface all at once. It crept in slowly, like poison. Each small incident a drop contaminating the well of trust. Over the years, Daniel began to notice a pattern of behavior that grew harder and harder to ignore. There was the holiday seating. During Christmas at the Lesters' grand dining table, Daniel found himself, year after year, placed at the far end, sometimes even at a separate fold-out table when guests overflowed, while Michael sat gleaming at Charles's right hand. One Christmas Eve, Daniel arrived to find every seat at the main table labeled with elegant place cards, except one: his. Vivian quickly produced a card with his name when Emily pointed it out, but the damage was done. Daniel spent that dinner squeezed in at the corner, his chair half pulled out into the doorway. He laughed along when Isabel joked that he'd drawn the short straw for seating arrangements, but humiliation burned under his collar. He told himself it was an oversight, an innocent mistake. But then it happened again, at Easter, at Thanksgiving, subtle shufflings that always left Daniel just a little apart, on the periphery of the family circle. Once, he even found himself relegated to the kids' table, under the pretext of giving the teenagers an adult to supervise them, while the rest of the adults talked freely at the main table. Daniel sat among the children, smiling gently at their jokes, but inside he felt as small as the 8-year-old next to him. Each time, he kept quiet to avoid spoiling the mood, but the pattern was forming, inkling by inkling. Then came the inheritance whispers. Late one night, months before the birth of Daniel and Emily's first child, he awoke at the Lester house feeling thirsty. It was past midnight and the house was still, the only light a sliver shining from Charles' study down the hall. As Daniel approached, about to call out and announce himself, he heard his name, and he froze in the darkened hallway. Through the cracked door, Charles's low voice carried, tense and insistent. Vivian murmured in response, her tone placating. Daniel held his breath and listened. "I've made up my mind," Charles was saying, voice cold and firm. "I'll be restructuring the will. Most of it will go to Isabel and Michael. They've made good decisions. As for Emily, if she insists on tying herself to someone who brings nothing to the table, then she can make do with what they have. I won't have our family's hard-earned money siphoned off." Vivian offered a timid protest. "She's our daughter, Charles. She made her bed." Charles interrupted curtly. "We have to protect our legacy. I won't apologize for that." Daniel's blood ran cold. He backed away before they could sense his presence, retreating to the dark guest room where Emily slept peacefully. Sliding down the wall, Daniel struggled to catch his breath. They planned to cut Emily and their unborn baby out of a significant portion of the family inheritance, essentially punishing her for marrying him. It wasn't just about money, it was about how little they thought of his worth. In their eyes, he wasn't a partner lifting their daughter up, he was dead weight dragging her down. He wanted to wake Emily that instant and tell her everything, but he hesitated. How could he break something so cruel to her, especially now while she was pregnant with their son? She needed peace, not a war with her parents. So Daniel stayed silent about what he'd overheard, burying it like a toxic secret. That night, as he lay back in bed, eyes open in the darkness, his hand found Emily's and held it protectively over her growing belly. He realized that this fight was no longer just about him. Their unborn son would enter a world where one half of his family already deemed him lesser, all because of Daniel's origins. The betrayal was no longer confined to Daniel's heart, it threatened his own child. And still, the poison kept dripping. After their son, little Alex, was born, the criticisms came sharply, masked as concern. Vivian would drop by their home unannounced to help, and Daniel would watch as she subtly rearranged the nursery he had painstakingly put together, as if nothing he did was quite right. "Oh, you chose that brand of diapers?" she would remark with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Isabel always uses the premium brand. She wants only the best for our grandchildren." The implication landed like a slap. You, Daniel, cannot provide the best. When Alex cried, Vivian would cluck, "He's probably hungry again," even if Daniel had just fed him, the unspoken censure being that Daniel wasn't attentive enough. Charles, too, played his part in this quiet undermining. One afternoon, Charles found Daniel on the floor playing with his toddler son, both of them laughing as they pushed toy cars around. Charles stood observing in the doorway and offered a thin-lipped chuckle. "That's good. Enjoy these simple games while you can," he said. "Soon, he'll need to start learning things that actually matter. Michael already has his boys enrolled in a little coders program, 2 and 4 years old, and they're learning coding basics. Our family's always ahead of the curve." Our family. The words were barbed wire wrapped in silk. In Charles's view, Daniel and his son clearly did not count as part of that hour. They were the laggards trailing behind, a burden to be politely tolerated at best. The worst was when Daniel discovered that the little injustices extended even to his innocent child. On Alex's 3rd birthday, the whole family gathered for a small party at the Lesters' home. Alex was thrilled to play with his cousins, Isabel and Michael's 2 sons, and the grandparents fawned over every child, except Alex. Charles gifted each of Michael's boys a shiny new bicycle, complete with bright ribbons in front of everyone. When it came time for Alex to open his present from Grandma and Grandpa, he tore off the wrapping paper with toddler excitement, only to find a simple storybook inside. Emily, seeing the disparity, forced a smile and thanked her parents, but Daniel saw the pain in her eyes. A storybook for his son, when his nephews received something far more extravagant. It wasn't about material things. Daniel would have been content with no gift at all, but the obvious imbalance sent a clear message. Even Alex noticed. The little boy looked up and innocently asked, "Where's my bicycle?" A heavy silence fell. Vivian cleared her throat and chirped, "Maybe when you're a bit older, darling." Later that evening, as Daniel buckled a drowsy Alex into his car seat, his son asked sleepily, "Daddy, did I be bad? I didn't get a bike." Daniel's chest ached with heartbreak and simmering anger. He hugged his child and whispered, "No, buddy, you've been very good. You'll have a bike one day, I promise." That night, after laying Alex in his bed, Daniel sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of a single lamp shining on the journal open on the coffee table. The journal he had started after overhearing the will conversation. With trembling hands, he added the birthday incident in detail, every cruel contrast, every hurt feeling. When he finished, he noticed a drop of water on the page, blurring the ink. A tear. He hadn't even realized he was crying. Page after page, entry after entry, Daniel had been documenting everything. The seating slights, the condescending remarks, the cruel disparities, each recorded in his careful handwriting. What began as a private outlet for his hurt had grown into a ledger of every betrayal. Rereading it was like watching a slow-motion avalanche, each tiny snowball of insult accumulating into an unstoppable force. There it was, in black and white. Undeniable proof of the pattern he had tried so long to deny. This was not his imagination. It was real, and it was systemic. His in-laws had weaponized kindness, doling it out to some and withholding it from others to keep their hierarchy intact. They had weaponized culture and class, using them to remind Daniel and even an innocent child of their place. They had weaponized family itself, turning the idea of familial love into a tool to control and wound. When Emily found him that night, hunched over his journal with eyes red and wet, he finally let her read it. Every last word. He watched as her face moved from confusion to shock to a sorrowful, trembling anger. She recognized each event. She had been there too, but had never put all the pieces together. Perhaps she hadn't wanted to see. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "How could they? How could I not have noticed?" Daniel gently took her hand. It was a painful awakening for her, realizing how her husband and child had been treated right under her nose. In that moment, Emily's illusion of her parents' unwavering love shattered, just as Daniel's had. It was no longer a matter of perspective or sensitivity. The truth was laid bare. They had been betrayed by those who should have cherished them most. That night marked the death of Daniel's last hope for acceptance from his in-laws. In its place, a cold resolve took root in his heart. He had tried patience, tried understanding, tried being the better man. It had earned him nothing but disrespect and heartache. Now, for the sake of his own dignity and his family's future, Daniel decided he would not endure quietly any longer. If Charles and Vivian wanted a battle of subtle cruelties and psychological games, he would quietly give them the war they started. Except this time, he intended to win. First, Daniel gathered knowledge, solidifying every slight into evidence. His journal was no longer just a catharsis. It was a weapon in written form. He made copies of the most damning entries in case he ever needed to show someone. He saved a terse email from Vivian to Emily, where a few polite sentences thinly veiled a suggestion that Emily keep a private savings just in case, given Daniel's unpredictable finances. He saved voicemails and even took screenshots of the family group chat where his messages about planning a get-together went unanswered. Little gray checkmarks sitting quietly while everyone else carried on the conversation without him. Each item was small on its own, but together they painted a stark picture of an outsider being frozen out by the people who should have welcomed him. Next, Daniel subtly began to change his own behavior, testing the waters of his new resolve. He became selectively absent, unexpectedly unavailable. When the next family dinner rolled around, Daniel, who had never missed a family event, declined the invitation, claiming a work obligation. Emily went alone with Alex. Deprived of their usual target for snubs and jabs, the in-laws had an uneventful evening, but they also felt Daniel's absence like a missing piece on a chessboard. Emily later mentioned that her parents seemed put off that he hadn't come. They tried to hide it, but she could tell they weren't used to someone else calling the shots. Daniel only smiled when he heard that. A small, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes. For once, he let them wonder where he was, what he was doing, instead of the other way around. The real plan took form after many late-night conversations between Daniel and Emily. Once Emily fully grasped the depth of her parents' betrayal, her hurt transformed into determination. For years, she had been the dutiful daughter, trying to keep the peace. Now she saw that peace was never theirs to keep. It was a lie maintained at Daniel's expense. United in purpose, the two of them plotted a confrontation that the Lesters would never see coming. They decided to invite Charles and Vivian over to their home for a private dinner. It was presented as a casual gesture. "We'd love to have you over next Saturday, just us to catch up." The parents accepted, perhaps viewing it as a white flag, a sign that Daniel and Emily were ready to smooth things over. Little did they know, they were stepping onto a stage set for their judgment. On the chosen evening, a storm rumbled outside, rain drumming on the roof of Daniel and Emily's modest home. Inside, the atmosphere was taut. anticipation thick as smoke. Daniel had set the dining table meticulously. There were 4 place settings, but one chair, Charles's chair, sat slightly off to the side, not fully at the table. It was so subtle it could have been an accident. When the Lesters arrived, Charles noticed the arrangement and a flicker of irritation crossed his face as he wordlessly pulled his chair into place. Daniel hid a cool smile. Let the games begin. Dinner started ordinarily enough. Roasted chicken, vegetables, polite small talk. But an undercurrent of tension lay beneath every chewing silence. Emily's hands were steady as she passed the salt, but her eyes were bright and alert, charged with what was to come. Charles and Vivian sensed something was off. The conversation faltered into uneasy quiet, broken only by the clink of silverware and the patter of rain against the windows. Finally, as Vivian dabbed her mouth with a napkin and offered a strained smile, asking Alex if he was enjoying preschool, Daniel decided it was time. He cleared his throat softly. "We wanted to talk to you about something important," he said. He looked at Emily, who nodded, face pale but resolved. Charles set down his fork. Vivian's smile waned and disappeared. Daniel rose and left the room briefly. He returned with the leather-bound journal, the vessel of all his hurt, and a small stack of papers. He placed them carefully on the table between them. A crack of thunder echoed far off, as if the storm itself paused to listen. "We've been keeping track of a few things," Daniel began quietly. His tone was calm, almost gentle. But his words were lined with steel. "And it's time we all acknowledge them." Charles frowned, glancing at the journal. "What is this?" he asked gruffly, a note of warning in his voice, as if sensing an ambush. Instead of answering directly, Daniel opened the journal to a bookmarked page. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his voice remained steady. "This is a record of how I've been treated in this family." With that, he began to read aloud. He started with an entry from 3 years ago, Christmas, when he was seated with the children. He read his own words describing how it felt, the confusion, the embarrassment, in a slow, measured tone. The room was silent except for Daniel's voice and the faint drumming of rain. Vivian's cheeks flushed pink. Charles opened his mouth to interject, but Daniel held up a hand calmly and continued to the next entry. He recounted Easter when no place card was made for him, and the polite chuckles that covered the oversight. With each recollection, Charles and Vivian's faces shifted from defensive frowns to something like discomfort, maybe even shame. Vivian began to stammer. "Now, that was never intentional, you must understand." But Emily cut her off softly. "Please, just listen." Vivian fell silent. Daniel turned a few pages and read an entry about the time Vivian criticized the diapers he'd bought for Alex. He quoted her words, written down verbatim. "Isabel always uses the premium brand. She wants only the best for our grandchildren." At this, Vivian brought a hand to her mouth. Whether she was shocked to hear her own words thrown back at her or ashamed, Daniel couldn't tell. Next, Daniel slid one of the printed emails across the table, the one from Vivian advising Emily to protect herself financially. Emily had printed it out herself. Daniel's voice remained even as he summarized the contents for Charles's benefit. "It's an email from last year. Vivian suggests Emily open a separate bank account that I wouldn't know about just in case." "In case of what, I wonder?" His eyes fixed on his mother-in-law. Vivian's lips parted, but no words came. The color drained from her face. She knew exactly what she had implied in that email, that because Daniel came from less, he might misuse Emily's money or abandon her someday, so better to have a secret stash. It was a betrayal whispered in honeyed words, exposed now in stark clarity. Charles bristled, breathing hard. "Enough of this," he growled. "What are you trying to prove, Daniel? That we're not perfect parents? So be it. But we have always done what we thought was best for our daughter." Daniel felt a surge of cold anger, but he kept his voice low and controlled. "Best for your daughter, or best for your pride?" he replied, eyes narrowed. Before Charles could answer, Daniel picked up another paper from the stack, a transcript he had prepared from an audio recording. With deliberate calm, he took out his phone and tapped the screen. A familiar, tinny voice filled the living room, and Charles and Vivian's eyes widened in recognition. It was them, on the recording Daniel had secretly made that night outside the study. "I won't have our family's hard-earned money siphoned off. Most will go to Isabel and Michael." Emily made her bed. Vivian closed her eyes as her own soft plea played. "She's our daughter, Charles." Then Charles's voice snapped. "We have to protect our legacy. I won't apologize for that." Vivian's eyes overflowed with tears. Charles looked as if someone had struck him across the face. In the silence that followed, only the rain and the faint crackle of the recording could be heard. The patriarch of the family, always so confident in his judgments, was suddenly rendered speechless by the sound of his own cruelty. Emily broke the silence. Her voice trembled with emotion, hurt and anger entwined. "How could you?" she asked, barely above a whisper. She looked at her parents, the two people she had spent her life looking up to, and her eyes were filled with tears. "All those times you smiled at us, invited us here, held my son on your knee, and this is what you were thinking? That Daniel was out to steal from you? That I'd need protecting from my own husband? Did you ever truly accept him at all?" Vivian stood abruptly, knocking her napkin to the floor. "Sweetheart, we never meant to hurt you, or Daniel," she sobbed. "We thought we were helping, protecting. Protecting who?" Emily's voice rose, not loud but sharp. "Because it wasn't me, and it certainly wasn't Alex. All you've done is hurt us." She picked up the printed email with a shaking hand, reading aloud the line that had burned itself into her memory. Given Daniel's background. "Tell me, Mom, what about Daniel's background scares you so much? That he grew up poor? That he isn't from some fancy family? You've been judging the man I love by something he can't change since day one." Her voice cracked. "You always taught me to value what's inside a person. Was that just talk?" Vivian was openly weeping now. We just wanted you to be happy, darling. We worried." "That I made the wrong choice?" Emily finished bitterly. "The only wrong choice I made was not seeing how terribly you were treating my family." She said "my family" with force, and Daniel felt a swell of gratitude and love even amid the anger. She meant him and Alex. Charles, who had been silent and stone-faced, finally spoke, his tone defensive and brittle. "We did what any parents would do, Emily. We had to be sure you were taken care of. It's a harsh world, and we have experience. We've seen how these situations can go." He shot a disdainful glance at Daniel, as if to imply "you people," before looking back at his daughter. "Maybe we went about it the wrong way, but we did it out of love." Daniel couldn't stay silent at that. A dry, humorless laugh escaped him. "Love?" he repeated, the word heavy with contempt. "Is that what you call this? Undermining our marriage, excluding me at every turn, treating your grandson like a second-class child? All because of my background? If that's love, Charles, I'd hate to see what hate looks like." Charles's temper, kept in check for so long by the shock, finally flared. "Now, you listen here," he began, raising a finger at Daniel like he was scolding an impudent child. But Daniel did not flinch. He stood his ground, gently shifting Alex, who had been clinging wide-eyed to his mother's leg, into Emily's arms and stepping forward. "No, you listen," he said softly. The quiet intensity of his voice stopped Charles mid-sentence. "Your job was to be a father to Emily and a grandfather to our son. Instead, you treated us like parasites. You tried to buy me off before the wedding, then spent years punishing us because I wouldn't go away. You smiled in our faces and plotted behind our backs. That isn't love or protection. It's control, it's pride, and it ends tonight." Charles's face contorted between rage and guilt. He looked to Vivian, who was sobbing quietly, and then to Emily, who stood firm, tears in her eyes but resolve in her posture. His authority, his dominance over the family had evaporated, and he seemed at a loss for what to do. So, he defaulted to anger. "You're really going to do this?" he spat, looking at Emily. "You'd turn your back on your own parents for him? After everything we've done for you?" Emily's lip trembled, but she held her head high. "Everything you've done to me, Dad," she corrected softly. "To me, to Daniel, to Alex. I wish you could have just been happy for me, for us. But since you couldn't, yes, I'm standing by him, by them. Daniel and Alex are my family now, and I won't let you hurt them anymore. If you can't accept that, then you're the ones turning your backs on us." Vivian reached out a hand, as if to touch Emily's cheek, but Emily took a step back, her eyes filled with sorrow. Vivian's hand fell, and with it, the last pretense that this was all just a misunderstanding. A long silence followed. The only sounds were the steady patter of rain and an occasional muffled rumble of thunder. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice low and defeated. "I think we should go." He looked years older than he had at the start of the evening. Vivian hesitated, looking at Emily desperately, but Emily gave a tiny, sad nod. It was time for them to leave. Charles and Vivian walked to the door, their steps heavy. Emily trailed behind to see them out, still holding Alex, who watched his grandparents with confusion. Daniel stood at the dining room archway, the journal still open on the table beside him, like a judge's ledger of sins. Before stepping out into the storm, Charles paused and looked back, perhaps hoping for a parting word. But none came. Emily's face was a mix of anguish and resolve. Vivian mustered a faint, tearful, we love you, Emily." But it sounded hollow, lost in the sound of rain. They left that night under a torrent of cold rain, their figures illuminated in a flash of lightning as they hurried to their car. The door shut, and they were gone. In the quiet aftermath, Daniel's gaze fell on the half-eaten dinner, the scattered evidence of years of betrayal on the table, and finally to Emily, who was soothing a whimpering Alex. It was over. They thought it was over at least. They were wrong. The storm that night was only the beginning of the Lester's reckoning. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Emily established new rules. They would not visit Charles and Vivian's house. They would not bring Alex around unless genuine apologies were made and real changes proven. Emily, heartbroken but firm, called her sister Isabel and explained everything. There were tears on both ends of that call. Isabel was horrified and apologetic. She had been blind to it all, perhaps willfully blind while basking in being the favored daughter. Now, Isabel felt the sting of shame and anger. She confronted her parents in a rage that Daniel never expected from the usually soft-spoken woman. The result was an extended family fracture that would not be easily mended. Word of what happened spread quietly through the family and their small community. Daniel and Emily did not blast their story on social media or make any public proclamations. They didn't need to. Truth has a way of coming out. A few relatives who had witnessed odd moments over the years finally learned the full story and expressed their disgust to Charles and Vivian personally. An aunt told Vivian point-blank that she was appalled by the favoritism and classism. Uncle Robert, who had always been a jovial supporter of Charles, pulled him aside at church and said, "I heard a bit of what's been going on. You know you really messed up, don't you?" There was no malice in his voice, perhaps even a hint of pity for the self-made mess Charles had created. Even Michael, the golden son-in-law, reached out to Daniel. He met Daniel for coffee one morning, looking genuinely uneasy. Michael apologized if he had ever unknowingly contributed to the dynamic, confessing he'd been oblivious and assuming the best of Charles and Vivian. "I never realized how bad it was," he admitted, shaking his head. "For what it's worth, I respect the hell out of how you handled this. It took guts." It was an unexpected gesture that Daniel appreciated. It showed that the ripple effect of revelation was touching everyone, and that even those who once benefited from the Lesters' behavior could see how wrong it was. Charles and Vivian, who had long held their heads high in their community, now found themselves ducking questions and avoiding prying eyes. The charitable foundation board that Vivian sat on heard whispers that her own daughter was estranged. The embarrassment was acute. Charles at his golf club caught murmurs among his peers, not loud enough to confront, but he felt the shift. The next time someone jovially asked, "How are the grandkids, Charles?" he flinched, thinking of how to answer without inviting more queries. Most painful of all, though, was the quiet in their own home. The phone rang far less often. Weekends passed without Emily's visits or little Alex's laughter echoing through their halls. The other grandchildren still came by with Isabel and Michael, but even those visits felt different. Isabel was cordial but kept her children's interactions with Charles and Vivian carefully measured. She no longer left them alone with the grandparents, always hovering, perhaps not fully trusting them anymore either. The easy, unquestioned authority Charles and Vivian once wielded in the family was gone. In its place was a fragile, uneasy truce, and in the empty chairs at their dining table, they felt the ghost of their mistakes. For the betrayers, Charles and Vivian, the consequences had a bitter taste. They had thought themselves the protectors of their family's legacy, the silent guardians making hard choices for their daughter's own good. Now, they were left with the undeniable truth that in trying to guard their legacy, they poisoned it. Without Emily, Daniel, and Alex around, the Lester household grew quieter and colder. The pride they took in their perfect family image was marred by the obvious gap where Emily's family used to be. In quiet moments, Vivian would clutch a framed photo of baby Alex and sob, realizing she had never truly embraced him when it mattered, and that now she might not get the chance. Charles, stubborn and stoic, said little about the rift, but he spent more time alone in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the wall of family portraits. One evening, he took down a photo from Emily's wedding, one where he, Vivian, Emily, and Daniel all stood together smiling. He held it in shaking hands, confronted by the warmth on Daniel's face in that picture. A warmth he knew had long since been extinguished by their actions. He didn't cry. Charles hadn't shed a tear in years, but he felt an emptiness inside that no pride or control could fill. Their power over their family had been stripped away. No longer could a disapproving glare or a subtle snub keep everyone in line. Those tactics had been exposed and nullified. If they wanted their daughter and grandson back, they would have to learn humility, empathy, and genuine respect. In essence, they'd have to earn what they once took for granted. Whether they would ever manage to do so remained to be seen. As for Daniel, he emerged from this crucible of conflict transformed. The timid, eager-to-please young man who once tiptoed around his in-laws was gone. In his place stood a man who knew his own worth, who had faced the worst in them and refused to bend. He was stronger now. There was no doubt of that. He had stood up not only for himself but for his wife and child, drawing a line that would not be crossed. In doing so, he protected what truly mattered, the weight of constant worry. Will they approve of me? Did I say the right thing? Am I good enough? Lifted from his shoulders. He no longer cared about earning the approval of people who never valued him to begin with. Yet, with that new strength came a certain hardness. Daniel was a bit more guarded now, a bit colder to those who showed signs of the Lester's kind of prejudice. He used to flash a friendly smile readily. Now his smiles had to be earned. It was as if a layer of youthful innocence had been sandblasted away, revealing a tougher but rougher surface beneath. He wouldn't call it bitterness. He truly hoped not to carry bitterness, but he carried less trust. He had learned that not everyone who calls you family means it, and he would be slower to embrace that word from anyone but the two people who proved it with their actions, Emily and Alex. For Emily, the aftermath was a tangle of pain and relief. She had stood by Daniel's side and she did not regret it, not for 1 second. In fact, she felt proud of her husband and fiercely protective of him and their son. But confronting her own parents left deep wounds. Some nights, Daniel would wake to find her silently crying in bed. She mourned the parents she thought she had. The childhood notion that they would always love and support her unconditionally. They had shattered that image, and it hurt like losing them to an entirely different kind of death. She was grieving an ideal, even as she knew the reality had been false. Daniel held her through those tears, reassuring her that she wasn't alone. She had family in him and Alex, and they would create their own happy, healthy circle together. Little Alex was fortunately too young to understand the specifics of what happened. To him, Grandma and Grandpa were simply not around as much. Once or twice he asked innocently where they were, and Emily would answer that they were busy or that we'd see them another time. She tried not to let bitterness touch her voice when talking about them in front of Alex. Whatever Charles and Vivian had done, she didn't want that poison to pass to her child as hate. If someday they earned a place in Alex's life again, she would let him decide what to feel about them based on how they behaved. Until then, she and Daniel poured their love doublefold into him. The boy never wanted for affection or attention. Daniel made sure of that, spending weekends kicking a soccer ball with him at the park or helping him build elaborate pillow forts in the living room while Emily cheered them on. Was the revenge satisfying? In the moment of confrontation, yes. It was immensely satisfying to see the shock and remorse on Charles and Vivian's faces, to watch their high towers of pride come crumbling down under the weight of truth. Daniel felt a grim sense of justice watching Charles struggle for words, Vivian breaking down in tears. It was the catharsis he had long dreamed of on those sleepless nights after a particularly cruel family gathering. It vindicated his reality. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't being overly sensitive. They really had been treating him like an outsider, and now they knew that he knew and that Emily knew. The look on their faces was the confirmation that the problem had never been him, it was them. But beyond that initial rush of triumph, revenge was not a clean, euphoric high. It was more like a necessary surgery. The poison had to be cut out, and the process was painful and left scars. In the quiet that followed, Daniel didn't feel joy. He felt relief, certainly, and a guarded contentment in the new peace of his home, but also a lingering sadness. A chapter of their lives had ended, not just the chapter of mistreatment, but the chapter of hoping for a loving, extended family. It was a loss, even if a chosen and needed one. Some evenings, Daniel would step outside onto the porch after Alex was asleep. He'd listen to the night sounds, distant traffic, a neighbor's dog, the rustle of wind in the trees, and allow himself a moment of melancholy. He'd think of the holidays to come. They would make new traditions now, perhaps invite friends, or visit his side of the family more often. But the sting was there. The knowledge that his son wouldn't grow up bounding into his grandparents' arms with pure joy like he should have. Not unless things changed drastically. And Daniel wasn't sure if he believed people as set in their ways as Charles and Vivian truly could change. In time, those feelings might soften. Perhaps one day apologies would come, genuine ones, not out of desperation but real understanding. Perhaps forgiveness would follow, but not now. The wounds were too fresh, the trust too thoroughly broken. And yet, despite all that was broken, something new was built. Daniel and Emily's marriage emerged stronger. They had faced the crucible together and come out united. Emily often told Daniel that watching him stand up to her parents was the moment she fell in love with him all over again, deeper, harder. It gave her a sense of safety and unity in their marriage that she hadn't even realized was missing. They both learned that family is ultimately what you make of it. If the two of them could weather this storm, there was little else that could tear them apart. Thank you for listening to Daniel's story of betrayal, courage, and transformation. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, standing up for dignity and respect can change everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What do you think about how Daniel handled his in-laws' betrayal? What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. Your perspective matters here. And if this story resonated with you, make sure to stay tuned for the next dark tale of betrayal and revenge. Until next time, remember, trust is precious.